Hello everyone and welcome back to Q's Book Reviews. My name is Quinn and today I'm going to be going over a few books that for various reasons I don't think I'm ever going to read. Now I actually have another video in the works right now which I'm really excited about, but it's going to take me a little longer to put it together. So in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this slightly quicker one and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next video. I have different reasons for avoiding all of these books, but I just want to start off by saying that I know some of these books probably aren't bad, but I also know that they just don't match my personal taste. While it may seem silly to, decide on books that you're not going to read, with the sheer amount of books that I want to get to in my life, I think it's actually worthwhile to sort of prioritize some and not sort of waste time on books that I know I'm not going to enjoy. Starting off this list is one of the most influential and highly regarded pieces of fiction ever written, and that's 1984 by George Orwell. And it goes along with another one of his works that I hope never to have to read, and that's Animal Farm. These two books have been so thoroughly ingrained in our society and modern discourse that I honestly feel like I won't be able to take anything further from them. Coupled with the fact that I'm just not a huge fan of the dystopian genre in general, I can only imagine these books would be a real slog for me to get through. His blanket dismissal of all spooky authoritarian forms of government gives cover to some of the most unnuanced attacks on socialism and communism, a fact which I'm sure he was well aware of given his staunch anti-communist leanings. What's more, the critiques that he lays out in these books could just as well be applied to our current social system, and while this analysis could be fruitful, there are just so many more authors and works that have really provided a much more thorough investigation. As such, reading 1984 or Animal Farm would really just frustrate me, and I consider myself really lucky that I wasn't forced to read them at all in school. Finally, I think it's also worth pointing out that, there's word that Orwell is just not a great person in general. And while I can see the use of separating art from artist in certain cases, here it really just doesn't make me want to read from him anymore. Now on to the author Taylor Jenkins Reid, who I actually don't think is a bad author at all. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo not too long ago and actually enjoyed it quite a bit. But at the same time, it's the type of book that really just doesn't draw me in, and I probably won't remember it. It was also the book of hers that was actually the most interesting to me, so I really don't feel compelled to read any of her others. While I don't mind lighter fiction, and I often seek it out to sort of offset the more difficult books that I read, I think there's a lot of other authors that just do it in a way that speaks to me more. Like, I'd really rather read just a straight-up romance book or a sci-fi book than some sort of nondescript, pseudo-historical narrative. I think it also has to do with the fact that Taylor Jenkins Reid really plays into a lot of celebrity culture, which is something that I've never really been into. So while I don't think she's a bad author at all, she's just one that I don't think I'm going to read anything more of. Switching it up a little bit, next we have a poet that I really don't expect to read, and that's the infamous Charles Bukowski. Known for his incredibly raw poetry, depicting some of the worst sides of American society, Bukowski's poems are often violent, abusive, and sexist to the highest degree, something that I just really don't see myself drawn to. I think there's a common theme to the rest of the works I'll discuss on this list, and that's topics which, while are super important to talk about and can be given such power in literature, are really let down by their authors in some way. Bukowski is a prime example of this. As while he gives voice to some of the downtrodden and outcasts among society, any redemptive or meaningful aspects of his work are drowned out by the rest of it. I understand Bukowski is sort of a polarizing figure, and I'm sure a lot of people like his work for very good reasons, so if you think I'm wrong on this one, please let me know. Continuing the theme of poetry is Rupi Kaur, a breakout poet from some years ago. Her collections, especially Milk and Honey, litter the shelves of almost every bookstore. In fact, I have an incredible image I'll throw up on the screen here of a bookstore I was in where it was placed on a shelf of classics, which really just did me mental damage. Although Rupi Kaur talks a lot about really important topics such as abuse and feminism, the way she goes about spreading these messages is just extremely trite, and every time I've seen one of her poems, it's really just read like one of the worst Tumblr posts. Almost nothing about the works is original, nor is it at the top of its class for what it is, so I really just don't see any reason for me to read Rupi Kaur or any of her poems. Finally, we have A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This is the story of the lives of 4 young men, following them as they grow up and the often horrific struggles that they face. I'm willing to bet that most of you watching have heard about it and maybe even read this book, but I think it's one I'm going to end up skipping. The main draw of this book is the horrific lives these characters live, and the over 800 pages of excruciating detail with trauma after trauma. Now, I'm no stranger to bleak and depressing books. I read Blood Meridian recently, which is an incredibly brutal book, but here it's the brutality that defines the very existence of the American Southwest. In A Little Life, the violence and sadness is utterly a fabrication, and one can always make a story more traumatic, more emotionally manipulative. And that's ultimately all I feel it is, a book designed to emotionally manipulate its readers in the cheapest ways possible. Like, to put it in perspective, A Little Life has more content warnings than Blood Meridian and Gravity's Rainbow combined, which is just insane. The YouTuber Man Carrying Thing has an excellent video detailing all his problems with the book, echoing my worries with it as well. And I'm sure there are a million others who have, very significant complaints about the book. Again, I have no problem with books where the suffering of the characters is the point, but I think it needs to be done in a way very different from A Little Life. So again, it's one book that I don't think I'll ever get around to reading. Okay, there's the list. I hope I didn't upset anyone too much, but if you do think I'm wrong about any of these, let me know why. Also, let me know what books you have zero interest in reading. I'll mention again, I'm working on a video which I think could be really fascinating, so be sure to subscribe.